It's said memory is the mother of all wisdom, a fundamental part of being human. But Alzheimer's disease slowly robs the mind. It's a cruel and undignified descent.
We know that every 5 years after the age of 65, your chance of getting dementia doubles. And that's very scary.
Currently, there is no cure. But mounting research suggests that Alzheimer's can be delayed and even prevented.
It's absolutely possible to have a healthy older age with intact memory and cognitive function.
In this episode, we explore how our lifestyle choices today might affect our chances of cognitive decline in the future.
1 year of brisk walking was enough to roll back the aging clock by about 1 to 2 years.
Those who were adhering to a Mediterranean diet had better cognition over time.
From what we eat to how much we move, even how we sleep, scientists are suggesting that the power to push back the disease is largely in our hands.
I honestly believe that probably as much as 80% of Alzheimer's is preventable.
That was probably about, I'd say, my 16th birthday or so. Pretty standard for our house, so there's cakes that Mum's made on there, and there's a bottle of beer, which is the old man's, I'm guessing, on the table.
Graham Plant grew up in country Victoria. As a young man, he was close to his mum, Kathy.
She lived for the family and the kids, and that was what really drove her, and she was happiest when the family was around her.
But about 10 years ago, Kathy Plant developed Alzheimer's. She was in her late 60s.
It was kind of a slow onset, and then as it got slightly worse, she started to forget things that she was good at, like cooking, or she'd just forget to do things altogether, or she just got disoriented, like putting the electric kettle on a hot plate and things like that, and forgetting what can go in the oven and what can't, and those sort of things. When people get diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, you lose them long before they go. That's kind of the way it is.
Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, accounting for up to 70% of cases. The condition is chronic, degenerative, and ultimately terminal.
So the hallmarks of the disease, clinically speaking, is memory loss and change in brain function. For some of the dementias, this can be other brain functions than memory, but for Alzheimer's disease, the first changes noticed are memory.
In a healthy brain, billions of neurons send messages to each other via electrical or chemical signals down a long tail, an axon. These are the synaptic connections through which messages travel. But in the Alzheimer's brain, toxic deposits accumulate, including a protein called beta amyloid. The amyloid seems to attract another brain protein called tau to form fibrous clumps inside brain cells. This disturbs the brain's message transport system, and neural networks effectively disintegrate. Until recently, this characteristic accumulation of beta amyloid was only detectable after death in a post-mortem. But thanks largely to Australian research, with advanced imaging, it can now be seen in the living. Turns out the process of accumulation can begin several decades before Alzheimer's disease appears.
To get from a normal amount to the amount in people with Alzheimer's disease takes about 20 years. So we know if we're going to intervene before you've lost any brain cells and before you've got memory loss, we need to be intervening much earlier than we are now. This is an Alzheimer's disease brain. You can see lots of holes, lots of cell loss, and really wide ventricles. And we know that this occurs over a great many years. If we were to intervene, say 10 years before, we would expect still some cell loss, but as you can see here, there's a lot more of this white matter. If we were to intervene 20, 30 years before disease, we would hope to maintain full cell function and cells without the loss. And that's why early intervention is just so important.
In midlife, Graham Plant is doing just that. After his mother died from Alzheimer's in 2013, Graham decided to take active steps to try to avoid his mother's fate.
So that became a clarity point to say, well, what are the processes, what are the things I can do to reduce the risk? And at that point, I'd probably recognise that I wasn't overly healthy, I was a fair bit overweight, and sort of decided, well, it's time to make a change. I was classified running as not a hobby, now it's becoming a way of life. It's resulted in me being better in a whole host of ways as far as health and well-being.
Science is suggesting Graham's on the right track because the genetic risk for Alzheimer's is actually less than you might think.
There's a small percentage, less than 1% of people who have genetic forms of Alzheimer's that causes Alzheimer's.
That's the uncommon familial form of early onset Alzheimer's. For the more prevalent later onset form of the disease, the riskiest gene variant is APOE4. But even then, environmental factors will largely determine whether the disease develops.
Now, genetic risk factors don't cause Alzheimer's disease, but together with other factors, such as lifestyle factors, that's when people go over the age and develop Alzheimer's disease.
We also know that the genetic component to risk appears to be only about a quarter. So that means that 3/4 of the risk is environmental and something that we can change.
It's an encouraging message, and exactly what we should be doing has been the focus of Professor Serki's latest research. She's trying to identify the preventative factors for cognitive decline.
Get you to lift up your arms, yeah.
Her team has followed a group of 400 women in Melbourne. When the study began, the women were aged between 45 and 55. They were then monitored for the next 20 years. A wide range of assessments were done, from physical measures like their weight and BMI to a battery of neuropsychiatric tests.
The first task I'm going to get you to do is a reaction time task. You'll see a deck of cards face
Recruiting
down.
participants in midlife was pivotal.
A lot of the studies that look at cognitive decline and dementia recruit participants over 60 or over 70 because this is when cognitive decline and dementia starts to occur.
I'm going to ask you to repeat as many of the words as you can remember.
Giraffe, cow, truck, spinach.
One of the great things about our work was we were able to look at what people were doing at 45 to 55 and then look at cognitive decline across 15 years and see what factors were most important.
They found that the most important preventative factors against cognitive decline were having normal blood pressure and high levels of good cholesterol. But at number one was being physically active.
So the results that are in the paper are the entire group and their group trends. What we're looking at here is individual people's test results. So this is someone who was exercising every day and they remembered 8 words and then they remembered as many words as possible. So they hit what we call the ceiling of the test. They could not get better than this over time. This is another person who was exercising on average daily. And again, we can see quite good memory recollection and maintained across all of the years of the study. We look here at someone who's never exercised and they have a poor memory function and it declines quite considerably over the testing period. Another person, and again we see a memory decline over this period. What we found was that the effect was cumulative. So this meant that what you did for that entire 20 years was important for the memory you had in later life.
It seems a very clear message. Move. Often. And start today.
In this study, we were not prescriptive about what kind of physical activity you had to do. It was just being active on a daily basis.
Professor Serki's research was solely in women and only observational. The scientific gold standard, however, are randomised control trials. And American neuroscientist Kirk Erickson has conducted several of these trials in older adults with both women and men, looking at the effect of moderate exercise on brain size and memory. The 2011 trial was particularly provocative. 150 relatively inactive people were allocated to either an aerobic walking group or a stretching control group, and it was for a year.
They come in for the same amount of time, 3 days per week. So the main differences between our two groups is the intensity of the activity. The walking group is getting moderate intensity, and the stretching and toning more light intensity.
Before the participants began their activities, their brains were imaged.
We put them into an MRI machine, a magnetic resonance imaging machine, that allows us to take very high-resolution, detailed images of their brain.
They were particularly focusing on the hippocampus, a region critical to memory formation.
So if you stick your fingers in your ears and essentially like this, pointing at your ears like this, you're essentially pointing at the hippocampus. So the hippocampus sits behind the ears, deeper in the center of the brain.
Normal ageing sees a decline in the size of the hippocampus of about 1 to 2% a year after the age of 50. Astoundingly, this trial found that brisk walking could reverse that decline.
In the red line, we're seeing a pattern of normal aging. This is our control group that is showing a normal decline. In the blue line, we're seeing those people that are exercising. The exercising group showed an increase in the size of this structure over this 1 year period. The change in the size of this structure amounted to about a 2% increase in the hippocampus, kind of like rolling back the clock about 1 to 2 years in terms of aging of the hippocampus.
Whether these very tangible changes to the structure of the brain translate into improved cognitive function has yet to be fully established. But Kirk certainly believes they do.
We know that the hippocampus is involved in memory formation. We know that exercise influences the hippocampus. And we know that deterioration of the hippocampus happens with age and leads to Alzheimer's disease. So there's plenty of reasons that enlarging the hippocampus through exercise will have a very clinical and meaningful impact on memory function and risk for dementia.
Graham Plant is moving much more than his mother did. He's also eating very differently to her.
Her lemon slice and jelly slice is sort of legendary. Country Women's Association book baking is kind of what she did. But yeah, she loved being in the kitchen.
As does Graham. But these days, he's cooking a very different cuisine to the one he grew up on.
Got a variety of tastes that she liked, but no, Miss Marcella wouldn't have been on the Country Women's Association cooking book, I don't think.
It's a diet he believes is better for his brain and health in general.
Live cooking, and I used to do a lot of barbecuing, loads and loads of meat, whereas probably now I don't really have any. Still fish. The fish side of things is one I keep as part of my protein intake. Twofold is one is the oils are good for me, and there's a whole host of benefits around fish, but primarily vegetable, no dairy, and it's helped on, I guess, reduce my weight, but also I feel better for it.
There's been plenty of research over the years showing the cardiovascular benefits of a healthy diet. Now, there's mounting evidence diet also impacts on the brain and cognitive function. Much of the research has looked at the Mediterranean diet, and one of those investigations is the Australian Imaging, Biomarkers and Lifestyle Study, known as the ABLE study. It investigated the effect of a Western diet versus a Mediterranean diet on cognitive change in a group of 500 people.
The ABLE study, which is a longitudinal study over the last 8 years, we've been able to look at diet, and what we clearly show is that people who adhere very strongly to a Mediterranean diet have a lower risk of Alzheimer's, and there's a lot lower levels of beta amyloid in their brain.
Although the ABLE study is not a gold standard clinical trial, its findings are consistent with other similar studies.
Adherence to Mediterranean diet means you're more likely to have good executive functioning, which is what we call planning, and that a Western diet is more likely to drop your visuospatial. And these kind of things are associated with the vascular disease, which is expected for a Western diet.
The first dish I'm going to make is a very traditional village-style vegetable stew.
Sue Rad is a dietitian and an expert in the Mediterranean diet.
Most dishes in the Mediterranean start off with garlic, onion and olive oil. What we're currently lacking is good quality clinical trials on the Mediterranean diet and cognition and brain function. So this, I think, is going to be the next frontier. But we have reason to be optimistic because the Mediterranean diet, generally speaking, is also associated with a longer lifespan. And everything goes into one pot. This is what I love about this dish.
The Mediterranean diet refers to the cuisine consumed in the olive-growing regions around the Mediterranean Sea. It's a culturally broad and diverse area.
So it's not exactly identical, say, in Lebanon or Morocco or Spain, but what is characterising the Mediterranean diet is that it is a plant-based diet based on unrefined foods. So lots of whole grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and of course, extra virgin olive oil. What olive oil does is it sweetens the vegetables. So even bitter-tasting vegetables, such as those edible wild greens, can be masked, the bitterness can be masked, and the olive oil makes the veggies taste really sweet.
The extent to which each ingredient in the diet is protective against Alzheimer's isn't yet clear.
We think two particular ingredients have very, very powerful roles to play. One is fish, and we think the omega-3s in fish are going to be big players, and fruit and vegetables. So a lot of the antioxidants we'd find in fruit and vegetables.
What we've done, we have thoroughly washed our dark leafy greens, endive in this case, and we're just going to stuff those, as many as we can, into a pot. So with the dark green leafy vegetables, what we know at present with scientific research is that they're very rich in something called lutein. Lutein is an important antioxidant that gets deposited in the back of the eye, the macula, and it's a bit like sunscreen for the eyes. But also it gets taken up into the brain where it's concentrated, and we believe it may have an important role there as an antioxidant. They call this horta. Horta means grass. These dark green leafy vegetables are loaded in something called nitrate. Nitrate, when consumed, gets converted into the body into nitric oxide, and nitric oxide is crucial to helping keep your blood vessels flexible. And that's important as we get older because blood vessels tend to stiffen up. Does anyone need more olive oil? You can taste it? Fantastic.
Another thing about the Mediterranean diet is it's low in refined sugar.
The traditional Mediterranean diet was very low in added sugar content. That was because they had to buy it, and people were poor in those times. So if anything was used for sweetness, it was either a bit of honey or a bit of grape must or something like that. But the diet was generally low sugar.
Striking sugar off the menu is a challenge for many, like Susan Lynch, a participant in the ABLE study.
The hardest part of trying to follow the Mediterranean diet is cutting out all the cakes and biscuits and ice creams, and that really is difficult for me.
The excessive sugar intake in the Western diet increases the risk of developing insulin resistance. This is essentially when the action of the body's insulin becomes ineffective. Some researchers, like Professor Suzanne de Lamont, believe this has a detrimental effect on the brain, leading to a type of brain diabetes and eventually Alzheimer's.
People have gradually increased the interest in the brain diabetes story, and I think it's a very exciting time to be doing this type of research.
Insulin is a hormone best known for controlling the amount of blood glucose in the body. But it wasn't until Professor de Lamont began researching that she realised insulin has a crucial role in the brain too. It aids the uptake of glucose in the brain's nerve cells and helps regulate the chemicals involved in the brain's signalling.
I knew that insulin had an effect on keeping neurons alive, and at the time I was studying, there was actually no information. So I was the beginning of studying how insulin worked in the brain.
To begin with, Professor Delamont's team blocked the action of insulin in the brains of rats to see if it had any effect. The results were profound.
So the way we test the animals, we put them in a maze. It's called a water maze. And they're supposed to be able to learn where the platform is. And they swim until they find the platform. And the smarter they are, they quickly recognize where the platform is, even if they can't see it. But the rats that lose their hippocampal function because we knocked out the insulin receptor or we knocked out insulin, they spend a longer time looking for the platform. They don't remember where it was, and they're very slow and sloppy at learning.
These rats had developed amyloid-like plaques resembling the ones found in people with Alzheimer's.
Many of the features that we look for in Alzheimer's were present in these animals, and I think that helped to fortify the hypothesis that Alzheimer's is a metabolic disease very similar to diabetes, but pretty much confined to the brain.
It is a tempting thesis, but to researchers like Professor Serkey, Alzheimer's prevention likely involves more than one factor. It's about combination.
I think also when we look at diet and exercise and a lot of these factors, social engagement, all these things we need to do, we forget about the overlaps between them. So with physical activity, those people who are doing more physical activity, often it was in group activities, or even when they're going for a walk, they're going for a walk with someone else. So there are added benefits more than just the exercise on its own.
That combination of lifestyle interventions on cognitive function is the focus of this randomised control trial. It's been conducted by a team of sleep scientists in Melbourne.
So diet, exercise and sleep are considered the three pillars of health, and based on research in the sleep field, we know that maintaining good quality sleep is key to maintaining cognitive function in later life.
Okay, so for this task, you're going to be trying to find a hidden pathway through a maze.
I'm stuck.
So we're looking to see whether enriching someone's lifestyle improves both their sleep and their memory, and then we're looking to see whether those improvements are related to each other, so whether by improving sleep you can also improve memory.
The intervention involves what they call an enriched environment. It features 3 different activities, and they're done in a group. There's a creative class, like painting, a cognitive activity, like chess, and an exercise class.
Because you've used other colours that are in your painting, there's more of a harmony, colour harmony.
Up to now, most of the lifestyle intervention studies have isolated each of the interventions.
They generally never combine the activities together. However, animal research has shown that by combining these things together, you get greater improvements.
We suspect that the total of those is greater than the sum of its parts. So by combining them, we hope to alleviate more the cognitive symptomology of these individuals.
Sleep is essential for a host of reasons, including for brain function. Recently, we've learnt that one specific stage of sleep is critical for memory formation.
We know this because if we deprive an individual of slow-wave sleep, memory is severely impacted. And if we enhance slow-wave sleep, we enhance memory performance.
But as you age, you spend much less time in that memory-forming slow-wave sleep phase, as you can see in this comparison of an older and younger person.
So this represents an 8-hour sleep period for N1 sleep, N2 sleep, which are lighter stages of sleep, and the slow-wave sleep, which is represented here by the blue bar. We can see for the first sleep cycle, there's a lot of slow-wave sleep in this younger participant, and also in the second sleep cycle as well. If we compare this to the older participant, and again, looking at the blue bar, you can see that there's much less duration of slow-wave sleep.
The team is hoping the combination of lifestyle activities will have a positive effect on slow-wave sleep and in turn on memory.
Because the study is ongoing, we haven't analysed all of the data at this point, but we have had a look at some initial results and they are promising. So we've seen that there is an improvement in self-reported memory.
We've long known that healthy ageing is possible, though far from inevitable. But we now know Alzheimer's isn't just a lottery.
I don't think anyone in this field is saying that participation in physical activity or eating a healthy diet will eliminate your risk. There's always going to be a risk, right? No matter how healthy you are, no matter what you do, there's always going to be a risk for heart disease or cancer or dementia. So we can't be 100% certain ever. But I think that if we can cut your risk in half, that's pretty substantial. That's pretty significant.
Making the right choices throughout life increases the odds of a good old age. That benefits ourselves, our families, and society at large.
Alzheimer's, it's terrible for the person. It's equally as bad for the family. And so I would like to think I'd put my family through that as a consequence of poor maintenance.
I certainly believe we can delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease without a doubt now.
A lot of little things together actually make a big difference. I think a little bit of diet, a little bit of exercise, you don't have to do a lot. Then it all sorts to come together and you feel much better for it.